we're really just here to discuss and take your questions. I don't have a huge presentation, although I do have a little bit up front that we'll use to kind of set things up and give you some idea of where the discussion should be. But quick bit about myself, just so you have some idea of my background. My name is Don Jones. I'm a curriculum director for all of the IT operations content that goes into the Pluralsight catalog. I've been working in IT for over 20 years, mostly in the Microsoft space. I've been an MVP award recipient since 2004. I've written a ton of books around all different types of IT, and I speak at a whole bunch of conferences. This is my Twitter handle, Concentrated Don. More than welcome to reach out to me there if there's maybe something that you think of afterwards that you want to run by me. Happy to help as much as I can in 140 characters there. But here's what we're going to kind of talk about today. It's Azure and AWS, primarily. We can certainly talk about some of the other cloud providers, but these are obviously the two giant gorillas in the room. Amazon is probably the market leader by double percentage points at least. Azure is coming right up behind them and certainly picking up a lot of market share these days. The third, fourth, and fifth place are really far in third, fourth, and fifth. You're talking about IBM, Oracle, Google Cloud, those guys. So I don't want to really position this too much as a versus, as so much as comparing. I do have a really strong belief that every company should use the right tool for the right job, and the strengths for one particular vendor really come down to what the job is. What is it you need it to do? What does your company work with? What are your skill sets? That's going to really determine the right one for you, more so than anything really intrinsic with the vendor themselves. I do have a couple of questions I want to start with, though. These are going to pop up on your screen as a polling question. So last month, I think, maybe it was, because we're in April now. Yeah, so it was last month. We did sort of a state of the cloud. I did it with one of our full-time authors, Tim Warner, talking about Amazon Web Services and Azure. And I'm just curious, take like 10 seconds here and let us know if you attended that or if you viewed it on demand later or if perhaps you missed it. This will just kind of give me a level set for the audience and let me know how much maybe I need to repeat or maybe what I can skip. Hopefully everyone had a chance. I don't want to spend too much time on this, so we'll go right through. Just about everybody missed it. Fantastic. So that means we're pretty much all on a good level. That's wonderful. That is available on demand, by the way. You can go back and watch that if you want to. And real quick here, realizing that a lot of companies use multiple cloud providers, think about the biggest one that your company uses if you use more than one. Is it Amazon? Is it Azure? Is it Google? It's fine if you don't want to tell me or if you've not made a decision yet. Again, just a couple of seconds to hit submit on this, and then we'll move on. And by the way, if you've got questions, this is a fantastic time to start dropping those into the question queue. I've got a couple of lined up in advance that folks have sent us, so we'll get into those first, and that'll give you plenty of time to add some in. So, wow, we got a little bit of a Microsoft-heavy crowd here. About a third of you are using Azure, about a quarter on Amazon Web Services, maybe one person using Google Cloud Platform. That's fine. But just as many people haven't made a decision yet, which is cool. Hopefully, we can give you some information today that'll help you do that. So, some questions. When we did the webinar last time, there was about 4 or 5 themes that really came across as strong questions, and I wanted to kind of hit those first. And one of the biggest ones was pricing. Amazon Web Services, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, how do they differ on their pricing? For the most part, pricing is not your biggest single concern. I know everybody tends to go in with, okay, who's going to be more expensive? And I want to say a couple of things on pricing because I think this is probably an important thing to just have in mind as you start looking at pricing. One, a lot of companies, and maybe not you because if you're watching this, you're probably a technical professional and these things make more sense to you. But when you get outside of the technical professionals and you start talking to executives and directors and managers, you get a little freaked out by cloud pricing because it's this whole, you don't know, right? It's pay as you go. It's pay for what you use. Well, we don't know how much we use. Is this going to be hugely expensive? And that's one of the areas where you'll really have to help your leadership understand what the pricing models look like. So for whatever cloud service it is you're using, help them understand what that model looks like. The bottom line is For the places where you can make an apples-to-apples comparison between Amazon, Azure, Google, these guys all have essentially the same pricing model, and they all charge really similar amounts as each other. Like if you're able to really get it down to this particular virtual machine with this kind of processor and this RAM using this much of this kind of storage, and there's so many variables, and that's what makes it hard to do a real apples-to-apples comparison. But once you kind of get to the point where you can do that kind of comparison, they all cost roughly the same thing, and that's because one of the areas where they compete is pricing. None of them can really afford to be vastly more expensive than another one because it's too easy for you to just switch. Pricing will probably not be one of the major areas that you worry about a whole bunch, therefore. So the next big question we had is, should pricing be the main concern? And no, it definitely should not. There is so many other areas of differentiation between these vendors. I know, it's really easy to think, well, they're all just running virtual machines. And at a certain level, that's true. You could just choose to buy a virtual machine running from them, in which case pricing might be the only concern that's left. But where they really differentiate themselves is on how you manage those assets. Amazon definitely has one way that they go about it. Azure has another way. They both have got APIs so that you can automate and code. Those are different APIs. They work a little bit differently, so you really kind of have to dig into the details and go beyond the pricing, right? It's like when you're shopping for a car. If you go out to your favorite car brand's lot, they probably have at least 5 or 6 different models that you can choose from, and you are not going to be looking at price as your primary distinction. Even if you haven't decided on a brand, if you're choosing between, Toyota or Ford or Chevy or Kia or whatever, price is probably not going to be your biggest thing because within a given class, they're all so similar on their pricing. You're going to be looking at features and gas mileage and safety and those details, and you probably dig a little bit to get those details. And that's some of the most important things to think about. So here's a really good question. I'm going to push this up, and hopefully everybody will be able to see that. I'll read the question just in case. Our primary software development is .NET on Azure. Our global IT department is really pushing AWS for our internal services and IaaS. As a DevOps manager, how can I balance the expertise of my team across both platforms since we need to support both? This really, really drives to a great point. We have, in the IT world, for so long been forced to make these binary decisions. And, when I first got into IT, it was, do I go with Windows NT or NetWare? I chose Windows NT. That turned out to be a pretty good bet for me. Now it's do we have Windows or do we have Linux? When it comes to the cloud, something that you really have to keep in mind, a core competency for you as a human being is I can do all of them. You really have to know how all these different things work and know some of their little quirks, because at the end of the day, the company should be able to use the right tool for the right job. And the company has got multiple jobs to do. And so if for one particular workload you're thinking like, wow, this setup that Azure has is definitely the best. I love this document DB thing and I want to use it. But for this other project that we've got going, I really want to build that out with Elastic Beanstalk. You need to have the competency to do both of those. And it is harder. It does mean you're going to have to learn more things. That's why you will keep your job. Keep in mind that one of the things that the cloud is all about is eliminating IT operations positions, right? It's about outsourcing IT operations to the vendor. And so the way we stay employed is by being smart enough to be the one who can manage all of that outsourcing no matter who it's been outsourced to. It is going to take a lot of education. Fortunately, there are some great options for that education. I will humbly offer Pluralsight, which has got great coverage across both Azure and AWS. But that is going to be the thing, is really being able to do all of these. It is tough. I don't want to downplay how difficult it is to stay skilled up in all those things, but that's where the core competency is. I've been speaking with some folks and they're like, look, we want to make it easier on the education. We want to make it so that we really only have to know one thing. That's not the right strategic attitude to have. That is not where your value add as a human being is going to come into play. Here's another really good question, and this is a great question because I think it really does dig into those types of details and differentiators I was talking about. In terms of the number of data centers in different geographies, who's ahead? I'm asking because we had to wait until Microsoft opened a local data center in Canada due to data residency rules. Data residency is a huge thing for so many people in so many different countries. Right now, in terms of number of data centers in different countries, Microsoft is definitely in the lead. They had a lot of things that kind of gave them a jump start on that, and they have been investing like mad to get more data centers in more places. I don't want to say that Amazon is like way behind there. They are certainly not. They just have a little bit less diversity in the number of data centers that they have in different places. So this is a perfect example of right tool for the right job, right? If your job includes data residency concerns and you need to have the data in your country, that is going to help drive you to one vendor or another in the event that both of them don't have something. Let's see here. Here's a really good question too, and this kind of digs into daily operations. What is a typical approach to using Azure Cloud with on-premises solutions? Not on-premise, that's one of my little grammar buzzwords. It's probably just a typo. So what's the typical approach to using Azure Cloud with on-premises solutions? You know, when we started dealing with the cloud and it became a thing, I think everybody started making this big argument of, well, no company is going to shift all of their stuff into the cloud, or at least not very many companies, and certainly not in the short term. So, you know, since we can't move everything, then we're not going to do this cloud. And I know a lot of companies still kind of have that attitude. And that's partly the fault of the cloud vendors who really kind of played this up as the next best thing in the universe, as you are no longer going to have your own data center. You were going to ship everything up to the cloud. I think now we've taken a much more reasoned approach to hybrid cloud. We're going to have some things in our own data centers, and we're going to have some things in the cloud data center. And those two things are going to have to talk to each other sometimes. I think Azure is much better positioned for hybrid cloud because Microsoft already has such a substantial footprint in our on-premises data centers. Because we can use many of the same tools and administrative interfaces and everything else wherever our Microsoft things are hosted, Microsoft has made it just a little bit easier to put a hybrid cloud together. Now, what is a typical approach for that? Right now, it's a little bit still seat of the pants. I don't think that until right now, and I'm going to say something in a second that'll tell you what's next, but right up to today, this exact point in time, we've not had a lot of really specific hybrid management options. It's mainly just been the fact that you can set up a virtual private network, you can make sure that the cloud network appears to be part of your local network, and you can manage everything with more or less the same tools. However, as of today moving forward, because they've done an airlift for Microsoft's Azure stack, that is going to be their way forward for hybrid management. It's going to give you an on-premises appliance that lets you manage your on-premises resources and your cloud resources in the same way. Essentially, and I'm going to oversimplify just a bit since we're trying to keep things high level, Azure Stack turns your data center into just another Azure region that's private to you. So when you deploy a new resource, instead of selecting, US West 2 or US South Central or whatever else, you select down the hallway. And that's your region, and that resource gets deployed there, but you manage it all from a single pane of glass, a single stack, if you will. Talk a little bit about skills here is a good question. How well will our current Microsoft SQL skills transition to Azure or AWS? The answer is twofold. The first fold is your skills should transfer very, very well. And the second is that your skills will not transfer at all. And here's why. If you are strictly dealing with relational databases, your SQL skills should transfer very well to either Azure SQL or to SQL Server running in a virtual machine in either Azure or AWS. And your skills will largely transfer to other relational database management systems like MySQL or Postgre or anything else like that that kind of uses that SQL relational database management syntax. Where your skills will not transfer so well is in the kind of the new age of cloud non-relational, NoSQL databases. So we're talking things like Cassandra and DocumentDB and things like that. MongoDB is the big one that you'll see in the Amazon side. Those are not relational databases. Your SQL skills actually can make it harder. I've been teaching myself DocumentDB, and I've been a SQL guy for a long time, and I think my SQL knowledge is slowing me down. But I'm starting to see how these things can be really, really useful, and they really leverage the cloud better than a relational database does. So it's kind of a twofold question, but there it kind of is. Okay, this is a great question. For a person who has not used either AWS or Azure, which one is better in terms of usability and configuration options? Better is in the eye of the beholder. I will tell you what I think, but you will probably be able to poll the people who are in this webinar right now and get about a 50-50% of agreement with me. And about half the folks are going to disagree with me, and I'll tell you why. I think Azure is better in terms of usability and configuration options. And I think that because Microsoft is really good at building really good user interfaces. And I think the portal that they've built on Azure is a really good portal. However, a lot of folks really like the simplicity and the non-sexiness, if you will, of the Amazon portal experience. I think, though, that once you get past kind of getting started with the cloud, who has the best user interface becomes less important than who offers the best automation and scripting and DevOps style management. And I think the two are probably roughly tied. Amazon's been at it a little bit longer, so I think there might be a little bit better level of sophistication in some of those layers for their product. But Microsoft has got a lot of developers, and they're really good at this type of thing. And they have been clearly advancing their state-of-the-art fairly rapidly to the point where I kind of start to believe that Microsoft might have a better long-term vision that they're marching toward, and that they may eventually surpass Amazon in terms of the sophistication of their usability and configuration options. Here's a fun question. Why has Google Cloud Platform not increased its footprint like Amazon and Azure? As you start to decide on what cloud vendors, plural, which vendors you want to do business with, it's important to have a little bit of a historical context. Let's take like 2 minutes and do some of that here. Amazon was the first. Amazon had built out this massive, massive infrastructure for keeping Amazon.com running. And at some point they decided, you know what, let's put this to use and sell the platform itself so other people can run their stuff on our hardware. And they've been doing this for a really long time. And because they were first, they attracted a lot of the startup companies of the time, the Netflixes and the Spotifys, and even companies like Pluralsight. We predominantly use Amazon as the back end for a lot of our video delivery and features like that. Microsoft came in later. They were the second comer to the game, and because they have such a huge footprint on-prem, as we've spoken about, it made it relatively easy for them to start picking up certain types of workloads, maturing their product, adding features, and obviously Microsoft has an enormous developer community, and that matters. Developers who are comfortable with the Microsoft stack can get involved with Azure very, very, very easily, and so that gave Microsoft a good head start there. Google has neither of those things. They were not the first. They were not the second. They do not have a large on-prem environment. They've got great knowledge at running large-scale data centers, but they were the third or fourth comer, and they didn't have a lot of the advantages that Microsoft had that let Microsoft be a good second comer. And so that's one of the reasons I think that Google has had a little bit more of a struggle. Let's This is a really good one too, and it's going to apply outside of the question itself, but I know Microsoft has invested heavily in HIPAA solutions. I think this applies broadly to all kinds of compliance, whether it's SOX, GLB, any of the European Union requirements, but we'll take HIPAA as an example here. Heavily invested to be in compliance for their customers in healthcare. It looks like AWS has similar services flagged as HIPAA compliant. Is there a clear winner here in terms of compliance offerings or in terms of ease of managing or demonstrating compliant solutions? I think Microsoft has a leg up here. I think they have been dealing with compliance issues in an on-prem perspective for a lot longer. I think Microsoft as a company has a better handle on what compliance involves and what the challenges are. And I think that because Microsoft as a company has been working with these industries, healthcare, government, finance, and so forth for so long, it's been a little bit easier for them to make compliance-specific solutions. That's not to say Amazon can't do it. I think Microsoft just had a really big leg up there, and I think they may probably maintain that for a little bit longer time. Let's see. Fun one. We're looking at setting up an AWS production environment with Azure as our DR environment. That is the most interesting sentence anyone has said to me in a couple of months. How easy is it to connect AWS to Azure so that VMs could talk to each other in the two different clouds? In theory, it should be very easy. Both Amazon and Microsoft support virtual private networking. So you could certainly set up VPNs between your Azure and your AWS assets. Your data costs, your network costs may wind up being significant. Keep in mind that you typically pay for network in terms of egress. So whatever leaves Amazon or whatever leaves Azure is what you pay for. You do not typically pay for ingress. So, whenever data is going back and forth, you're going to pay for it on one side or the other. That would be my biggest concern, is just keeping track of the finances on that. But it should be pretty straightforward to do that. Here's a fun one. This is a little bit selfish, so I hope you'll tolerate this. But can you go into what courses and Pluralsight you recommend for ramping up that core competency in AWS and Azure? Yeah, I can. We actually have got a bunch of courses that we have just published on the Azure side by author Tim Warner, and probably we don't have everything needed to put together a learning path yet, so you're still going to kind of be picking up the individual courses, but look at what Tim Warner and also John Saville have been doing on the Azure side. And the course titles will make it really obvious which ones are the getting started and the big picture and so forth. On the AWS side, I actually think Amazon has done a really good job of laddering their certifications to kind of present a beginner, intermediate, expert level. And so look at author Elias Knaser, Khaneser. He has done most of our certification content, and our content for certification on the Amazon side is not just how to pass a test. It's actually teaching you to do those job tasks. The test is a little bit incidental as far as we're concerned. We want you to be able to do the job, and so that's where his training comes from. And then as you get to the expert level, that DevOps level, the author you'll want to look for is Mike Pfeiffer. And those are hopefully all relatively easy for you to find. And here's a good one. I noticed vCloud Air wasn't mentioned in any of the polling. Is VMware that far behind Microsoft and AWS, or just a niche player? As of yesterday, VMware is not a player at all. They're discontinuing the vCloud Air product entirely, which tells you how far behind they were and how little traction they were getting. So vCloud Air isn't actually a thing anymore. And along those lines, because I wondered if anybody was using VMware out there, and obviously people are, but didn't know if you were on this webinar, which cloud service would transition better from vSphere? VMware has a partnership with Amazon so that you can directly migrate your vSphere virtual machines into vSphere running on AWS. So that's probably, at quick glance, the easiest way to get your stuff running in someone else's data center. If that's your goal, though, if your goal is to get away from on-prem for a virtual machine and get it into the cloud, I would focus a little bit more on, how can we move over to a native cloud, like natively running Amazon virtual machines or natively running things in Hyper-V. Azure. Microsoft has some tooling that makes it pretty easy to migrate a vSphere VM into Azure. It's not hard for either of them. You probably should just take a look at some of the tooling and see which ones appears to be a little bit more interesting for you. Let's see, I'm going to hop over to this one because this is a question that I see quite a few in the queue here. So I'm just going to try and get a bunch of these out of the way with this. If we already have a big on-prem Windows investment, is Azure a foregone conclusion? The answer is no. There's no such thing as a foregone conclusion. But if you have a big on-prem Microsoft investment, then Azure is going to probably look very attractive. You still need to do your due diligence and make sure that you're doing the right thing. But Microsoft's going to make it very easy for you to integrate Azure into your life if you're using a big Windows investment on-prem. Let's see here. This is an interesting one. I don't know that I'm going to hit the question exactly, but let's see. Does Azure provide any active management of hosted products, or do you manage them like you would any on-premises solution, more specifically SQL Server? I'm going to try to answer your question by talking about this bigger, because I think this is an area where everybody dealing with cloud should pay very close attention. This is where people screw up the cloud. Right? And I want to make it very clear that most companies I see making mistakes in the cloud are making it around this exact thing. Cloud providers offer three very broad categories of thing that they sell you. One of those is software as a service. This is when they're selling you Office 365. It's when they're selling you Azure Active Directory. They're selling you some piece of software, and they are going to run and maintain that software for you. The next thing they offer is infrastructure as a service. This is basically they're just giving you storage and compute and network, and you're running your virtual machines. This is the least effective way to get a huge win out of the cloud. There's no force multiplier for IaaS. You're taking the same virtual machine that you have to care for and feed and bathe and maintain on site, and you're just shifting it up into the cloud. You still have to worry about patching it, patching the OS, and everything else. They're not going to do any managed services for you on that. So if you're running SQL Server in a VM on site, whatever work you have to do to that is the same work you're going to have to do if you run that VM in Azure or AWS or anywhere else. That's why the big selling point, the big force multiplier for the cloud is platform as a service, PaaS. This is where you're using, to stick with SQL Server as an example, Azure SQL. Instead of running your SQL Server in your VM, you just upload your data to Azure SQL and Microsoft takes care of it. We all know that under the hood there's still virtual machines of some kind. There's still software running, but we never see that. We don't touch it. We don't have to maintain it. We don't have to patch it. We don't have to care for it. We don't have to feed it. We don't have to lock it down. We don't have to secure it. We don't have to do any of that. We just stick our data in it, and it works magically. That's where the cloud sells itself. It's not just another place to run your VMs. Sometimes that's going to require applications to be re-architected or changed or potentially rewritten from scratch, which you have to decide if you want to do and are able to do or not. But the selling point, the upside to the cloud is not just moving your VMs from one place to another. The upside is really offloading the painful part of owning a VM, which is patching it and securing it and everything else. And that's where platform as a service really comes into play. And that's where these cloud vendors are really, really focused on a lot of their services. Here's a good automation question, which always captures my attention. We need to create and destroy environments on demand with fully automated processes. I approve of any company that uses the word destroy right next to environment. I love it. It feels good. In your experience, is AWS or Azure faster at this process? My experience is they're about the same. all things being equal, they both take about the same time. They both take about the same amount of work to set up initially. That's because I tend to do all of these things through code. I would say that Azure Automation is probably starting to give Microsoft a little bit of a leg up because you can kind of graphically create these workflows if you want to. The graphic ones aren't as flexible as coding it yourself, which is what I tend to do. But I would say both companies are probably real similar in their capabilities. Let's see. This is a beefy question. We're a company with a high consumption of Microsoft products like SQL Server, Windows Server, SharePoint, O365. We moved from AWS to Azure recently, getting 50% more pricing reduction using the program to migrate licenses on-prem to Azure. Because our agreement is huge, software servants, they got at least 20% of a performance increase. But CloudWatch from AWS is better than Azure Automation. Is there another option for Azure Automation? CloudWatch is more their monitoring. That's not really Azure Automation. That would be OMS, or what we were calling OMS. In terms of better, there's a couple of things you can do if you've got. By the way, those are awesome numbers on the savings, and congratulations for that. I knew Microsoft was giving some great deals to people who are migrating licenses, but I did not realize they were that good. It pays to have a good contract. In terms of monitoring, I would offer this, two things. One, there are third parties that build cloud monitoring solutions. You don't have to go with a Microsoft monitoring solution any more than you have to go with an Amazon monitoring solution if you're using Amazon. You can use something else. And if one is not doing what you need, that's probably where I would look. I would say also that Azure Automation and the OMS pieces are the areas where Microsoft is investing some of its biggest time and effort, and so you're going to probably see more new things and more improved things in that area than in a lot of others. Because Microsoft knows, just like Amazon knows, that the way you really keep a customer is to make it easy to do their day-to-day job. So once you've sold them something, then they have to maintain it and monitor it and care for it and feed it, and if you can make that easy, then you'll have them for life, and they know that. And that's where they're putting a whole bunch of their effort. Here's a good question. And I'm not going to have an answer for you, but I'll have more questions. Platform as a service seems like nirvana, and it does. And trust me, it can be compared to doing it all yourself. But how much can the provider be trusted to truly protect my data? You are going to have to ask yourself that question, and you are going to have to talk to the provider, and you're going to have to you decide what constitutes trust for you. You're the only one who can decide, what's important to you. What do you mean by trust? Are you worried about backups? Are you worried about security? Are you worried about someone hacking their data center? Or are you worried about them building a data center on an earthquake fault and the data center falling into the middle of the earth? You've got to decide what your concerns are, and you're going to have to do that research. Trust comes the same way it always does. I will say this, though. As you go out and you start investigating vendors and you start outlining, okay, here are my concerns. Here are the things that worry me. Now I'm going to go look at the vendors and see how they address those worries. You need to be fair, and you need to answer how you address those same worries. Because for the most part, I will bet you that all of those vendors are doing a better job on all of your concerns than you are. Now, there are some exceptions. Perhaps you work for NORAD, and so you've got a data center buried underneath a mountain with a bunch of Army guys surrounding it, so that's pretty safe. But for the most part, these guys do a better job than most of us have ever done on our own. They've got more data centers. Their data centers are surrounded with barbed wire, not with drywall. Nobody goes into those data centers. They've got all kinds of security, including biometrics. I mean, they are doing a really good job at these things, and they're probably doing a better job than your own data center. Let's see. Here's another one. We'll push this one out. There seem to be a bunch of questions around this area, so let's cover this. Oops, wrong one. I answered that one already. How about the big AWS outage in March? Should our businesses still consider AWS? Your business, Given the outage that Amazon had, and given that that outage was literally caused by one guy typing something wrong, you should definitely not consider using AWS if you work for a company that has never had any kind of outage of any kind in its IT infrastructure ever. In other words, if you live in a glass house, don't throw rocks. There's always going to be outages in IT. What you need to look at is how the vendor treats it. A really good example is Apple. I'm an Apple fan. Please don't take this as beating up on Apple. I have an iPhone. I like my iPhone. I work on a Mac. I enjoy the machine. But when Apple has an outage, they're like the last ones to admit it or talk about it. And when everything finally comes back up online, a lot of times their attitude is, what? Nothing happened. Look, over there, it's Elvis. Don't look over here. Amazon, in their case, had a huge outage. It was a huge problem. They were fairly upfront initially about saying, yes, there's a problem. They maybe could have done it faster, but I imagine they were all running around like chickens with their heads on fire trying to fix the problem, and it didn't occur to them to immediately put up a post that said, yes, we have an outage. But they did. Once it was over, and I think this is really where you can tell if you can trust a vendor or not, they were completely transparent. At least I feel that they were. They could easily have said, no, we were hacked by the Martians, and there was nothing anybody could do, and this and that. But they didn't. They didn't try to lie. They didn't dissemble. They came right out and said, we screwed up. We had a servicing tool. A guy took too many machines out of service. The tool should not have allowed him to do that, but he did. And here's how that cascaded into the failure we had. We learned a lot about how their infrastructure works that way. We are now going to go modify that servicing tool, and we're going to inventory all of our other tools to make sure that they don't allow that to happen in the future. So here's how we're going to address the problem. We all make mistakes, and what you really need to decide with these vendors is, do you trust them to learn from their mistakes and not repeat the mistake? I think Amazon demonstrated that they did learn, and they are going to try and prevent that from happening again. And that's really all you can ask for in a world of human beings. Let's see. Here's a great. This is. I don't know if you guys listen to the podcast that I do for Pluralsight, but most episodes end in kind of a little rant, and this is going to be my rant for a future one. Which cloud provider is more secure and how? Secure is an adjective, and it should not be. I want everybody right now to raise your right hand and swear that you will not use the word secure as an adjective anymore. You will also not use the word security as a noun anymore, because security is not a thing that you get to. Security is a journey. Secure cannot be used to describe anything. Nothing is secure. It can be more secure than other things if you're doing a comparison. It can be less secure than other things if you're doing a comparison. The word you should be using is a verb, securing, because it is something that all of us have to do all of the time. None of the cloud vendors are inherently secure or insecure. How you set up your resources will determine how secure they are, which means it is on you to do a continuous job of securing those resources, continually checking them, monitoring them, modifying the configurations to meet your needs. You are the one who determines how secure you need your things to be, not the vendor. There's no vendor out there who will stand up and say, yeah, we're more secure, because they know it's a lie. You are the one who determines what it is has to be secured for your organization, and it's your job to go about securing that. So that's an oath we can all take, hopefully. Let's see. This is a good one, too. I've heard that Azure has been providing more focused platform as a services longer than AWS. What is the advantage of one or the other? Azure is, if you remember back when Azure launched, they didn't even offer infrastructure as a service. They were only offering platform as a service initially, basically running websites, and they have been doing it longer. If you look at some of the app services they have, mobile, Azure Functions, Azure API services, they have probably got more platform as a service things that are specific for specific use cases and scenarios. And I think that's largely because Microsoft is a software development company. And they see themselves as software developers, and so they think a lot about how developers work and what developers need to deploy. The advantage of these things is that, if you're publishing an Azure API endpoint to the cloud, you don't have to worry about what operating system that's on. You don't even know. You don't have to worry about, is it running IIS and is that fully patched, or is it on Apache and is that fully, you don't know. They're handling all of that. You just get to focus on your code, your application, the thing that you do that you care about. They're attempting to take all the overhead away, do it for you, and that's what you pay for. And so I think that's a very important thing to be considering, and I think that's where the advantage of PaaS comes into play. I'm switching over to the software as a service side for just a real quick, and probably going to take questions for just about 5 more minutes. So if you've got a couple of last ones you want to try and jam in here, please feel free. We're looking to move our Active Directory Federation Services infrastructure to the cloud for high availability. Is there an advantage to using either AWS or Azure for ADFS? There's probably a little bit more advantage in using Azure, not for ADFS per se, but because of all the things that you want to plug into ADFS. Microsoft is very used to running ADFS in the cloud. It's a linchpin for making Azure Active Directory more useful. So my suspicion is that running ADFS in Azure will ultimately open up more opportunities for you, even though the actual act of running ADFS in a VM itself is going to be very similar on either platform. How do you see IBM's entrance into cloud services impacting the landscape? Right now, I haven't seen it impact the landscape at all. Apart from cashing checks, I'm not even sure what IBM does these days. They don't make hardware anymore, so the M part of their name is a little weird because it used to stand for machine. Again, they're like a 4th or 5th comer to this space. I'm sure that there are a certain number of very large enterprises that are very comfortable with IBM and have great working relationships that would like to rely on their vendor to provide cloud services. I certainly don't see IBM getting up to the level of a Google, let alone a Microsoft or an Amazon in that space. Oh, heavens. I've got a lot of questions in here, and they're all so good. Okay, here's a good one. How would you compare both Azure and AWS from the developer's point of view? Which one offers the best tools? Depends on the developer. Microsoft has obviously gone through great lengths to make sure things like Visual Studio integrate tightly with Azure. They've got great tool sets. Amazon has played in the open source space. They're primarily Linux-based for a long, long time. So they've got things there that make it easier. The thing I have found with developers is there's no single developer who can agree on what makes all developers' jobs easy. The concept of easy varies from developer to developer. And so if this was my concern, ease of developer interaction, if that was my main criteria for selecting a vendor, I would have to really sit down and talk to my developers and discover their definition of easy. What is it that they use already? What do they tend to prefer to do? And I would try and find a stack that lined up with that. Here's a fun one. Are you aware of any issues using VMware on-prem and Hyper-V in Azure with an extended or a hybrid data center? Not particularly. In fact, if you look at Azure's, what they used to call Azure Site Recovery, it's just part of Azure Backup now. Microsoft lets you replicate on-prem VMware virtual machines into Azure, so that in the event of an on-prem disaster, like a meteor hitting your data center, you can spin up those VMs in Microsoft's cloud. Now, under the hood, they're converting those to Hyper-V VMs, of course, but there really shouldn't be any issues in using both products if both products are providing you with the value that you need as an organization. Oh, okay. This is where I'm going to leave us off. This is sort of a great kickoff. Do you advise going, learning and certifying on AWS or Azure or both? The answer is both. These are the two big players in the field. I have always believed that in order to protect my career, I need to be ready to go do whatever it is my company or the next company might ask me to do. Whether or not my current job demands both Azure and AWS, my career belongs to me, not my employer. My career is my responsibility, and I am going to make sure that my career is set up to do the best it possibly can, and I'm going to know as much about both of the big players, and I'm going to know a little bit about Google and Oracle, even though they're a distant third and fourth place. I'm going to hedge my bets, and I'm going to learn a little bit about their model, if nothing else, because that's what's good for me. Now, how can one easily get experience in these fields? Because employers tend to look for on-the-job experience. Sure, you're going to have to give yourself a little bit of on-the-job experience. Get a trial to both of them, set some things up, take some Pluralsight courses to help accelerate that process for you. At the end of the day, if you're with an employer who says, look, we're hiring a really high-level person, and you have to have, we're going to pay a lot of money, and for that money, we want someone who's done this before. Well, if you've never done it before, then you're not going to qualify for the big money job. But you have to be willing to go in for less money to an employer who can say, sure, for a lower level position, we understand that you've done a lot of this on your own, you've done a lot of training, you've done a lot of home labs, and you've gotten a bunch of certifications. So while that might not qualify you for our top-end job, we're going to accept the fact that you don't have any hands-on experience and bring you in at a lower-level job, and then you can get that experience and hopefully grow. And that's just kind of the standard way that anybody moves around in any career. So I'm going to leave it there, and Lindsay, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I think we're here on the slide deck, and I want to thank everybody for your time. Hopefully, you have found this to be useful. We would really like to do this type of office hours discussion again across all types of different topics and so forth. So there'll be a survey a bit later, and if you can give us your honest feedback about how this has gone, we would really appreciate it. It'll help us do a better job for you in the future.